Hello, I'm Jan Szerwiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. Now, in this episode, we're looking at one of the biggest geopolitical riddles of our time. What's next for Russia after Putin? Now, the logical answer to that question might seem simple. Another Putin-like figure, right? Yet, looking deeper, we see that Russia's future isn't a straightforward sequel to Putin's autocratic blockbuster. Instead, it is a power vacuum where the script is still being written, and the cast of potential successors is varied and frankly quite extensive. Each has their own vision for what Russia could or should be. Some of these ideas look suspiciously like Putin's Russia 2.0, while others hint at something much stranger. So without further ado, let's take a look at the latest person to throw their hat into the ring.
No hate, but justice for Russia's leader Vladimir Putin. That is the stance of Yulia Navalnaya, the widow of Putin's late contender for the seat of power, Alexei Navalny. And she intends to make sure that justice is served once Putin ceases to be president.
My goal is to do all this and to help to make all these changes happen. If I will come back to Russia, I will participate in the elections.
An economist and a former banker, for most of the time Navalnaya was a moral support to her husband in his political career and a mother of two. She entered the world of politics only around 2020, playing a crucial role in obtaining Putin's permission to take her husband to Germany to receive treatment following his poisoning with the Novichok nerve agent. Following Alexei's death, Yulia has been lobbying the European Union to push through new sanctions against Putin. Together with her daughter Dasha, she met US President Joe Biden to ensure him that she would not lay down her husband's weapons. But some analysts argue that Navalnaya can capitalize on her wife and mother archetypes to be perceived as a mother of a nation at historical turning points, such as a decades-long rule of a despot drawing to an end. In a Sunday interview for The Times, she stressed, however, that she did not want Putin's head, but rather to see him behind Russian bars, experiencing the same conditions her husband endured. In his memoir entitled Patriot, Navalny described the harrowing conditions of his imprisonment.
It is so hot in my cell, you can hardly breathe. You feel like a fish tossed onto the shore, yearning for fresh air. Most often, though, it's like a cold, dank cellar. It is invariably isolated, with loud music constantly playing to drown out the screams of those being tortured.
Sentenced in absentia to 2 months in prison by a Russian court in August, Navalnaya has been living outside Russia. She would face immediate arrest upon return to the country.
And now, as tradition dictates, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Before we fully get into the personalities, let's talk structure. Russia, as it stands, isn't a uniform state like France or Japan. It's more like a sprawling empire of semi-autonomous regions bound together by Moscow's iron grip. That grip is held for over 2 decades under Putin, but once it loosens, whether by his own choice, force or fate, those regions might start re-evaluating their relationship with the Kremlin. Picture this: the Far East with its mineral riches eyeing economic independence, the Caucasus, already a hotspot of ethnic tension, contemplating a breakaway. And in the heart of it, Chechnya, whose leader Ramzan Kadyrov has spent years perfecting the art of quasi-autonomy, wondering why he should bother answering Moscow's calls at all. And there is the rub. For any successor, the challenge isn't just taking Putin's place, it's keeping this loosely bound federation from unraveling altogether. Right now, Russia functions like a game of Jenga. Every block, every region is in place thanks to a fragile web of promises, coercion and funding that holds the whole thing steady. Take out a single piece, say by losing control over an area like Tatarstan or Yakutia, and suddenly the entire tower risks collapsing. Now, let's talk about the potential heirs. Imagine this: as a casting call for the lead role in a rather dark political drama. First up, we have the ultranationalists. These are the not-so-shadowy figures who believe that Putin, as aggressive as he is, hasn't gone far enough. They are the ones rallying for Russia to go full empire mode, to aggressively expand its borders and reclaim what they see as lost territories. Figures like Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, rest in pieces, may be gone, but his ideology lives on. Under such leaders, the idea of reform would be laughable. Expect a fortified version of what we're seeing now, but with more military spending and less tolerance for dissent. Then we have the oligarchs, the financial juggernauts who for years have happily enriched themselves under Putin's regime. Now, if an oligarch takes the reins, it's likely we'd see a leader focused less on ideology and more on, well, profit margins. This might buy stability in the short term, but long term, let's just say managing Russia as a network of personal fiefdoms sounds less like democracy and more like Game of Thrones Russian edition. And then there are the reformists. Yes, believe it or not, there is a small group of politicians and activists who envision a democratic Russia. But they face two enormous problems. First, Russia's political culture has been molded around the iron-fisted central control of Moscow for centuries. And second, they are outnumbered. Their voices have been drowned out by years of propaganda, repression, and a public psyche built around the need for a strong hand. For a reformist leader to emerge, it would take nothing short of a seismic shift in Russian society, which, let's be honest, isn't exactly around the corner. The irony here is that while Putin's regime has painted itself as the bastion of Russian stability, he's actually set the stage for a succession crisis of epic proportions. The old Soviet model was to create continuity through the Communist Party's control. Putin's model, by contrast, relies on one man. And as that man's grip inevitably loosens, what comes next is anyone's guess. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Agnieszka Legucka, analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you for the invitation. Hello.
So let's consider a hypothetical scenario. On one day, Swan Lake begins playing on Russian state TV. Putin's rule is over. So, does Russia actually change immediately after this? Or could we be looking at a very slow, very gradual evolution instead?
Yeah, we need to start from the history point of view, because in the history there are very narrow situations when Russia was trying to democratize itself usually after being defeated in the wars. And that can be a situation, very little possibility. However, I do recognize that there is only a few percentage of chance that the system not only will collapse soon, but at the same time there are circumstances or even more people who will democratize Russia. We need to understand that democracy in Russia has been diminished in the sense how we and Russians do understand the definition of democracy. For them, it is a chaotic time, it's disruption, problems, privatization, and very difficult times. So they do not recognize democracy as a system which is profitable for people.
So what you're saying is that not only is democracy in Russia something of a pipe dream, perhaps something that the West is dreaming of, but also that much would need to happen in order to facilitate these changes, right? So let us consider once again the question of the Russian statehood. Do you think that should such changes take place, we're not talking about any specific time frame, we don't really know when this could happen, but if it does, do you think that the Russian Federation might begin to fracture, or will there be political elites strong enough to hold it all together?
Yeah, but this is kind of a tricky question, and it's very difficult to answer this question in particular because every change, if it will happen, definitely will be from the top down situation when elite will struggling, will divide itself and feels insecure within the system, which is right now. Now the support for Vladimir Putin around himself, in the elite, is quite strong because Russia feels and the Russian elite feels that they are winning the war. The situation may change, however, if Russia will be defeated, fully defeated. And unfortunately, when we look at the Russian opposition outside of the country, one leader, Garry Kasparov, who is directly saying that Russia needs to be defeated fully to somehow destroy this imperialistic virus among the Russian citizens, which is the very crucial point. Other members of the opposition do not spoke it loudly that Russia needs to be defeated in Ukraine. They are, in general, they are saying that that Ukraine cannot be defeated, that the Russian troops need to be withdrawn from Ukraine, and they are afraid, and they are pointing it very clearly that there is a threat of dissolution of Russian Federation, that it was in the Soviet Union, the collapse, and they are afraid of that. They don't want that. Only few people in the Russian opposition are loudly saying that it won't be a problem for the whole world to have a smaller Russia or divided Russia, because that's not only fear from the Russian opposition, but at the same time part of the West. I would here point definitely the United States and Germany at the first place, which are very afraid of the collapse of Russian Federation. From my personal view, analytical view, there may be some problems also like within the Russian Federation, like for example in the North Caucasus. However, there is not comparison for the Soviet time when we had the problems, national ethnical problems, religion within the whole empire. Now the Russian Federation needs the process of decentralization, the real decentralization, and that can be a chance for this country in its history. Maybe not under the umbrella of democracy, but more peaceful country in the future.
So let's talk about the Russian opposition now. You've mentioned some members of the opposition really clinging to the idea that the collapse of the Russian Federation, or the empire, we can call it an empire for the sake of this discussion, they consider this to be a threat. Do you think that this imperial mindset is what really is holding back, the likes of Yulia Navalnaya, for example, and Alexei Navalny before her? I mean, when you ask someone in Ukraine, for example, what they think of Navalny, you're not likely to get a positive response, because the Ukrainians knew that Navalny really wasn't that much different when it comes to the fundamentals of Russian statehood, of what constitutes a strong Russia, what it needs to be strong, and so on. So what is your take on that? Are we really facing a situation whereby we have an opposition which is not really looking towards the future, but is firmly rooted in the past, just with a veneer of democracy superimposed on top of that?
From my perspective, the imperialistic way of thinking is not only in the whole Russian society, but at the same time, if you scratch a bit, all of them in the Russian opposition, maybe not with some like minor difficulties or differences, they still believe that Russia needs to be strong, needs to be superpower. However, they see maybe it in a different way. However, for example, Alexei Navalny was also not saying directly or loudly that Russia needs to be democratic country. He all the time saying that Russia could be positive country, could have better future, but actually he was not directly like saying what kind of future for Russia he would see. And that's why he was criticizing Putin, which was okay for us. Yulia Navalnaya, she is criticizing Putin's Russia, but we don't have a clear answer what kind of Russia we will see after, if something will happen with Vladimir Putin and the opposition will take power. Alexei Navalny only when he was in jail and when the Russian invasion happened, he only then changed his narrative about Russia withdrawing from Ukraine, about democratic and better Russia for the Russian citizens, because he knew that if he would not be poisoned and that he would return to Russia, definitely he would have to work with the Russian society. And it's challenging. Only little part of the Russian opposition, including Yulia Navalny, they are pointing that it's the Russian war. They are usually saying that it's some kind of a Putin war, and the army, which is sometimes paid army mercenaries from, I don't know from where, because not from Russian society. They are not blaming, they are not taking maybe not blaming, but they're taking the responsibility as the Russians' war in Ukraine, which is crucial thing to understand what kind of evolution we would see if we would see in Russia after Putin.
So for what you're saying, it does seem like the problem may lie not just in the Russian opposition, but in society itself. I mean, the opposition is behaving from its own standpoint, perhaps rationally, because it knows what ordinary Russians want. So the problem could be, do you agree that the problem is that the ordinary Russian doesn't care about empowerment, doesn't care about participation in the democratic process? What they care about is this feeling of national pride coming not from personal gain, from their own wealth, but to some extent from listening to national TV, national propaganda, and hearing about the successes on the international arena, how Russia is respected, how Russia is regaining its position, taking back what is theirs. Do you think that this can actually be undone within any foreseeable future, this kind of mindset?
I don't believe that it can happen, actually, because once when I was talking to my Russian colleagues, she described Navalny as a too European politician, not directly could have any possible change in Russia. On the other hand, if we do recognize Russians as an imperialistic society, it needs to be defeated. The Russians need to be defeated because I would say that it's not some kind of unusual society for the whole world, like the Russian soil or something. I do believe that the Russian society is a colonial society. So we had in the history colonial societies which could somehow develop to democratic system. And I believe that this post-colonial or even colonial society needs to be, that's why we need Russia so desperately need to be defeated, exactly for those Russians to understand that this kind of way of thinking need to be dead already. And it's like 19th century provision, 19th century system of the world, which is not the case nowadays, and it's not for the future. It's not modern and need to be very much defeated in the mindset. At some point, unfortunately, the Russian opposition do not point at it very directly, and I think that they should do that, because otherwise the Russian society will stay as such, and all the time will have the feeling that others are trying to defeat Russia from inside, others trying to destroy Russia, which is not the case. Russia is an aggressive country, and Russians do recognize it, and it's like an imperative. They need to do that because otherwise they would collapse.
So Russia, the last colonial empire, a country stuck in the past with no time machine in sight, unfortunately. Agnieszka Legucka was our guest today here on Eastern Express. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight. And now we're moving on to Eastern Newsflash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. A draft treaty proposal from the early stage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been made public. It reveals Russian leader Vladimir Putin's objectives with the ongoing war, and frankly, makes Ukraine's refusal to sign it hardly a surprise.
Published by the investigative outlet Sistema, affiliated with US-funded Radio Liberty, the draft was prepared in Moscow and presented to Ukraine's representatives during the third round of negotiations held in Belarus on March 7, 2022. The document allegedly proposed that Ukraine reduce its military to fewer than 50,000 personnel, formally recognize Russia's control over Crimea and the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and that both Ukraine and the West lift all sanctions imposed since 2014. In addition, Ukraine's ability to develop or deploy missiles with ranges over 250 kilometers was also to be limited. Under the treaty, Russia would impose future restrictions on other types of Ukrainian weaponry.
Dядя Putin needs you. Sell your soul to the Kremlin. Become a cog in Russia's ruthless war machine, and if you survive the front lines of Ukraine, you may have a chance to enjoy the prize, Russian citizenship. Here are the numbers of foreign nationals who have been lured by this rather hazardous prospect.
According to figures published by Russia's Interior Ministry on Monday, this year the country has granted citizenship to more than 3,300 foreign nationals under Putin's decree. The decision facilitates the issuance of passports to individuals involved in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as well as their family members. The decree allows foreign military personnel to sign a one-year contract with the Russian army or pro-Russian forces fighting in Ukraine to obtain Russian citizenship. Additionally, Russia has enacted legislation permitting the revocation of citizenship from naturalized citizens who fail to register for military service. Over 1,100 nationalized Russians had their citizenship revoked in the first 8 months of 2024 under this policy.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, living in Russia is far from easy, but its government has taken steps to simplify life by reviving the good old medieval barter. So, what could you trade a tangerine for? Find out in this report.
Increasingly restrictive requirements by foreign banks have relegated some Russian companies to the practice of barter. These transactions threaten to reduce budget revenues, but the Russian government is more concerned with maintaining imports in the necessary volumes. Following a barter manual prepared by the Economic Development Ministry in January, Saratov-based Astarta Agro-Trading followed the document in preparing its first such deal with two Pakistani companies. Under the agreement, Astarta is to exchange 15,000 tons of chickpeas for an equal weight shipment of mandarins and 10,000 tons of lentils for potatoes. Other companies exchange China-produced household appliances and building materials for Russian flax seeds.
And for this episode of Eastern Express is the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.